come over here and let's create a new class, and we're gonna call it sign in notifier. Okay, notifier, and it extends. Now here's something called state notifier. Now this is coming directly from Riverpod. Okay, all right, and over here we would see that there are a few things that, okay, first thing it says that create constructor to call super constructor, and this is very interesting. So as soon as you write something like this, it's telling you, okay, you need to have a constructor to call the super constructor. So a lot of things going on over here. So let me remove this, and of course you will see it's gone. So it only appears when you extend another class. So when you say extend another class, that means borrowing some of the fields and properties from those class and use them here. So that's called extending. All right, and well, okay, well, it says that go ahead and you should create a constructor to call super constructor. If you do that, it's gonna work like this, and that's fine. Okay, now actually we don't want to do it like this. We can do it like this, which is I like, and then here you could do super, and then you have to call something. But of course, what do you pass over here? That's very important. Okay, now what do we pass over here, and how do we know that what you are going to pass? Because you see there is an error over here. It says that one positional argument expected but 0 found. But now over here you see that state notifier itself needs a type. If you hover over on this on the error, it already said, but now because it doesn't know what you are sending over here, that's why it says dynamic. But this is something that we are not going to use, because this is extremely error prone. Just put here dynamic. All right, even I'm not sure that it would work if you put dynamic over here. Most probably it's not gonna work, dynamic or anything, or over here actually let's say dynamic, and nothing. So it's not really going to work. Oh, it does. Looks like error is gone over here, at least. Okay, good. But this is something that we are definitely not going to do. But with this, you get a simple idea that, okay, looks like we need to mention a type. Why we need to mention a type over here? That's the very first thing. Well, state notifier makes your class observable. And what class we are talking about? We are talking about this class. And this class, the whole class pretty much would be observable. Now, how does it make it observable? Well, this class should be working with some data. And where is this data coming from? You need to mention that, which I mean state. So it needs the state class, and we already built the state class over here. So this is sign state class. Okay, so when you extend state notifier, you need to give it a state class so that this class, this child class, can use this data, so that this class also becomes reactive, or it can use the data. Well, this class wouldn't be reactive in a sense. Actually, this data would be reactive, but this one would be manipulating, using those data to help us whatever we want to do. Okay, so the first thing we learned over here is that, well, you need a type over here, but this is the worst way of saying the type itself dynamic, because it's extremely error prone. But anyway, if you put it here, the error is gone. So that's what I'm trying to say. But now we don't want to have it like this. We want to say sign in state. Sign in state. All right, okay. Now if you put sign in state over here, we immediately get error. And why? Earlier we didn't have this error, because here we are saying, okay, state notifier deals with a class, that class name is this, but here we are passing state, we are passing string. That's the problem. So these two types, they should match. Whatever you put over here, you should pass that kind of state over here as well. So it is more like the earlier we have seen, like whatever the state you return, they should match like this. Okay, so build type, they should be also matching whatever the build type is being returned. This and this, they have to match. Okay, So the similar idea is over here. We see that, okay, so of course we don't see the return, but this is not, it's not going to accept this. So over here we have to pass sign in state, and it should work. And you can also put const over here most probably. Okay, right. So if you have a class and that class has a parent class, which means that your class extends another class, and then once you create a constructor of that class for your own class, and you should be generally calling the constructor of this parent class, and by saying super and passing something inside, this is called calling the constructor and passing data. So that's what it happens. But in general, even if you say have it like this, you'll still have error. Why? Because your parent class has a constructor and that needs data. How can we confirm that? We can come over here. You see, so this is an abstract class. Of course, in general, you'd extend an abstract class. You cannot just go ahead and extend another random class. You have, when you extend, the class has to be abstract class. Abstract class means that it'll just give you some blueprint, but the body or the implementation of it, it depends on the child class. So in our case, this is the child class. So it's gonna implement whatever inside is there necessary, but this is the blueprint, okay? So like the rules and regulations, but how you execute this, it's up to this sign-in notifier class. Anyway, now over here, if you see, open it up. Okay, first here we say it takes a type. It could be anything, okay? Anything, any type, any primitive type, any custom object type. And then here you see there is a constructor, and you have to call the constructor and pass data. And what do you pass over here? You see over here you are passing state. Now what is the state? State, let me see. So over here this T is the state type. So you see that whatever you are passing over here, that object becomes also the state. Okay, and that's exactly what has happened over here. Whatever we are passing over here, that becomes our state. Remember earlier said the data in this class, the fields in this class, they'll have data, and those data would be reactive. Okay, those data is the data that becomes our state, because we're going to save them, retrieve them, use them across our app. So hopefully it makes sense. So this is very important idea, and this is the reason actually I'm using this way of defining our state class this time, because this class, extend, super, and constructor, this thing's core idea of programming. If you use object, or if you learn object-oriented programming with Java, PHP, Dart, Golang, this is the core idea, or any language like that. Okay, so they all pretty much use object-oriented programming style. But the earlier way when we did that, I felt like it doesn't expose much of it. Yeah, it does look like a little bit of it. And we also see the build method. This is also over here because of object-oriented programming style, which I'll talk later in future tutorials. Of course, in this course I'll be talking. So remember, the purpose of this course you guys are taking, it's not to just build a UI and how to learn the programming concept and some better practices, which is useful. Once again, you want to learn programming concept rather than learning a framework, because good framework, all the good framework, they pretty much follow the same pattern. Trust me, once you learn this thing, you go ahead and learn React Native, and the way you'd be coding is the same idea, and you'd learn it much faster. But anyway, so here, so because this state notifier has a constructor, and then we have to call that constructor. To call that, we use super, and then whether you need to pass this thing or not, whatever we are passing over here, it totally depends on the constructor of this class over here. Okay, if it has an object, you have to pass that one. If it doesn't take anything, you don't have to take anything. All right, or you don't have to pass anything. So that's how it works. Hopefully it would be a very useful idea throughout your programming career, and which is very useful. Now here still it goes more than that, just a lot more than that. Why? Because sometimes you will see that even though you have a class where you extend things like this, and you might have your own constructor, but you are not calling something like super, and that works. But in our case it doesn't work. Why? Now we need a very good example. So let's go back to our Dart pad. Now this is our Dart pad over here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a class over here. First I'll say main function, just like this, and then over here we're gonna say something like this, class animals, and then here, yeah, that's it. And then I'm going to do something like this over here, and the class dog, just like this. And then here I'm going to extend this animal class. So here it's say extends animals. All right. And then, okay, well, what is it happening over here? Looks like nothing is happening. But of course, if we want, for example, we can go ahead and create a variable and dog, and then we say dogs. All right. And let's hit enter, and nothing's going to happen. Okay, so that's the first thing. And over here we do see that we were not calling any kind of constructor, and of course, and at least we don't have any error. Looks like I need to connect with my VPN because I'm in China. Sorry about that. And now let's go ahead and run it, and yes, nothing is there. So it looks like a little bit different than what we are learning over here. Okay, well, one class is extending another class, and we have to have this constructor. If you don't have this constructor, it's gonna say go ahead and call your super constructor, and then first you call your own constructor, and it still has error over here. And why is this happening? The reason is because like this. So in our case, this is the superclass and this is the child class. Child class is extending the superclass or the parent class. This is also called parent class. But the thing is that this class doesn't exactly have a how to say a constructor. It does have, but that constructor is implicit, which means that even if you don't write it there, it would assign a constructor like this. Okay, it would just assign a constructor like that. That's it. Okay, and now if you go ahead and run it, you'll still say, of course, no changes at all. So it looks like you write it and you don't write it, it's the same thing. But the idea is, if you don't write it, it assigns, Dart compiler will assign a constructor automatically. All right, now how do I really know that this constructor is being called or not? Here's the thing. You can have your body over here and you can print here animals class. Okay, now let's go ahead and run it and we'll see something interesting happens. Looks like we don't need this. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it and we'll see over here it says that animals class. Okay, so interestingly, even though my class over here dogs doesn't have any constructor, looks like, and then it's still calling this one. And why it happens, just now, remember, just now I said that if you have a class and that class doesn't have any constructor, I mean, if you don't assign constructor like this, it'll still assign a constructor automatically. So there is a constructor. Even in dogs class there is a constructor. Okay, now let's run it and we'll see that, of course, this time the same as before, nothing changes. So the constructor is still there even if you write it or not. And if you want, you can also assign a body over here. Now here we can say dogs class. All right, now let's go ahead and run it, and here interesting things will happen. Sorry for the error. Now let's go ahead and run it, and here we'll see that, okay, well, my network issue, sorry about that. Okay, here we go. So here first we see that animals class and dogs class. So what's happening here? So if you have a parent class and that is extended by another class, the first thing is that you don't assign any constructor, they assign the constructor automatically. If you don't assign, Dart will assign automatically. And how can we prove that? So you can go ahead and write something like a print statement in your constructor body, and then you see that, oh yes, they're there. because you just put it there. Here you see that we are not calling animals class constructor, but it is called automatically, but which is very different from here. Well, here I do have the same thing. I have this constructor of this class, but I still get an error. Why? So we have to know that. All right, so once again, first thing we learned that if you have a parent class and then it is extended by another child class, the constructor, if you don't assign any constructor are assigned automatically. And the second thing we also learned there, the way they call. So first superclass constructor gets called, and then the child class constructor or baby class constructor gets called. Now the another thing which I was addressing here, that what to and how to solve this issue or learn this issue, that what is this. Now let's come over here. The reason is why it doesn't work here and it works here. The reason is because over here in our case, the state notifier, you see state notifier itself, the constructor takes a parameter, and here in our case you'll see that animal class constructor doesn't take anything. So the idea is if your superclass constructor doesn't take any parameter and subclass or the child class wants to use it, you can use this superclass constructor without calling it. We are using it without calling it. For example, when you go ahead and call the superclass constructor, what is a superclass? Animals class. So go ahead and call the superclass constructor. How do you call it? Super. Okay, and that's it. And even if you call like this, you will see that there is no error. So but why in our case, in this case, the one that we have this error? Once again, the reason is because in our case superclass constructor doesn't have any parameters. Say for example you have a variable over here, string bark, all right, and then well over here you assign this in the constructor. Let's go ahead and do that, this dot bark. Now you'll see that we are getting error. So the idea is if your superclass constructor has a parameter, then when you call the superclass constructor from child class, you have to pass a parameter too. So what parameter it takes? It takes a string. So over here you can pass a random parameter like loud or whatever it is. Okay, it doesn't really matter. And then you see no problem at all. So this is the idea that we learned. So that if your class superclass constructor has parameter and when you call that from your child class, then you have to pass the parameter, otherwise you will get error, and you will get error everywhere. So for example, if you have it like this and you see that okay, here you're trying to call and you get error. Why? Because you have a parameter over here that you need to assign. You're not passing, that's why you get error. If you just simply call like this, you still get error. The only way to get rid of error is this one. Okay, so pass a string and then you run it and it works. So this is the basic relationship between child class, superclass, and the constructor. Okay, so after this you should be very clear like when you are calling a superclass constructor or not, and at the same time why you need to pass parameter. So two learnings in general: if your superclass constructor doesn't take any parameter, you don't really need to call anything. Okay, all right, and it would work. But if your superclass constructor has parameter, you have to call the superclass constructor, and at the same time you need to pass parameter inside the super. Okay, now after this we have solid understanding. So let's go back to our app over here, the one that we are trying to do now. Okay, let's go back to our original state. This is the state. Now over here, of course, earlier we said that we can just simply pass a string or whatever, but here it looks like we're passing the same class. But of course, if you come over here and try to pass the same class, animals, and you will get error. Definitely you will get error. You see there is an error, but looks like over here we don't have this error. Why? Now it totally depends on the superclass constructor, what it takes. It takes something called this.state, and we just learned that this state refers to the class itself, the one that you are passing. So that's why in this case it's working. So the same class we are passing. Okay, all right, so that's why it works. So it totally depends on the superclass constructor, whatever it takes. When you call that super from your child class, they have to match, otherwise you will get error. Okay, and this is the reason that I wanted to use this approach, because if I didn't do that, a lot of you might not have known this idea, and which is core to object-oriented programming. Trust me, I've been programming for 10 years. I know that this is something that you want to learn, because this is something you'd be able to use even from now on 50 years later, because most probably object-oriented programming would be there. Okay, so these are the core ideas that you should master and understand, and then design your class. Everything else is kind of unnecessary. So to me, the new way of doing like this, new way of generating it, I feel like it took a lot of idea away, which is good, and it also has a trade-off. In future, we'll take a look. What is this thing? Okay, there are a lot more things to talk about it. But anyway, okay, cool. Now, if it is so, now we can go ahead and find our register notifier, which is this one, and most probably we can copy some of these ideas from here. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy these things, and what we could do now over here, we can put some of them and remove most of them. Okay, like it doesn't take username, it only takes email address, so other two things we don't need to do. Cool. So okay, so that's how you go ahead and design a class that should be connecting with your UI to transfer data, and that data would be saved in this class. Well, I wouldn't say saved in this class, in this model. This is more like a model, because remember, when you create state notifier, what it is trying to do, it's trying to give you a shared memory in the app, so that our app, certain app, can access it anywhere from the app. Okay, so with this, it's like giving you a shared state. Now this shared state should use data. Where is this data coming from? This data should be coming from our UI. Now this, how does the UI interact over here? Using this sign-in notifier. Okay, and then once the data comes from the UI to here, we pass the data to shared state using this method. Okay, and what kind of data should be held in our shared state? This kind of data. Okay, where we will have an email and password. So hopefully your understanding about it should be very clear by this time. Okay, once again, we'll have a UI will pass data to us, because we're gonna do a form registration, and then that data would come to this class using these two methods, and then we take those data and pass to our shared state. And what is the data, the type of data we are passing? We already said, okay, these are the only two type of data we want. Okay, so that's why it's gonna work.